Hey, sports card fans, it's John, Wade Boggs fan. It's time for another look at the Vintage 100 Index Hobby Report, and I am joined by my co-host once again, Mike Baseball Collector. Mike, how you doing?
Man, I like being your co-host. Hello there, sports cards fans. This is your voice. Like everybody comments on, like you're just even tone, like melodic, symphonic sounds coming from your voice. It's just fantastic.
Well, I had to tell a very quick story. I was involved with a local chapter of Big Brothers Big Sisters years ago, and we were doing a fundraising event, and they had me. I was on the board of directors, and they had me go into the local radio station to do a little plug for our fundraising event. And so I did a quick little 20-second commercial or whatever. And the one guy who later turned out to be a board member as well, he was like, "Man, you have a real voice for radio." I'm like, "I don't know. I mean, I don't know." But he thought I sounded good on like radio and stuff. But anyway,
I have a
um,
face for radio.
yeah. Well, a lot of people say that to me too. So maybe I missed my calling and I should have been on radio. But yeah, I missed you last month. I went solo. Hopefully the viewership didn't just crash off and say, "Hey, what the heck happened to Mike and stuff?" But you're back. You had a crazy schedule these last 2 months.
I did.
And of course, with holidays, and you had a mission trip and just a whole bunch of stuff. In fact, we're even coming in on the wire here for this November
We're cool.
episode. It's, I'm gonna have to turn right around and start doing more data for the next month.
I know it's like my bad, not being available, but we're here. We're doing it. We have the data. It's a
Yep.
little late getting to you guys, but I don't think anybody's calling you going, "Hey, where's the October data? I've been dying."
No,
Yeah,
no, we're not at that stage yet, Mike. Where people are like texting me on my phone. Are you okay? Is everything all right? We haven't gotten an index report, so
right.
yeah, but it's still fun.
Well, let's just get into it.
Let's get right into it.
Okay.
All right. Well, the index for November came in at 1,223.27, which is essentially unchanged. I mean, it was
Right.
technically up, but we did have, as usual, a revised October index, which was up slightly. There were a couple, and in doing this and another video on my channel where I used VCP data, I come to realize, or some people have pointed out, that when there is a buy it now um, card sold, I guess VCP, or when they grab data, say from eBay, the data is only grabbed once that normal time frame of that auction ends. So if it was a 30-day listing for a buy it now, and someone buys it like 5 days or 10 days before that 30 days, I guess either the data isn't available or something, that it takes that full 30 days for that data point to show up in VCP.
Interesting.
So, yeah, now it doesn't do it for auctions, it appears. So, again, that's what I've been told, but it makes sense because the ones I'm looking back at, I think all of the ones where I have to make an adjustment are the ones that say buy it now. And
Okay.
there's a lag in the data. Now it still shows when the sale took place, but it's not until that next month that it gets posted. So again, the changes are very minor. I think it may have been like 1,217 or something like that, 18. It doesn't change it wildly. There may be in any given month 2-3 cards that's affecting.
But it's still
But
good to
that's why
keep
you
it as
see this
current.
revised figure.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to keep it as current as we can.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So for since January of this year, down just under 4%. Again, nothing dramatic from the month before. The month before, you're starting to see these small little changes in the index on a monthly basis. But of course, going back to when we started the data back in January of 2019, I mean, it's still up a healthy 144%. I mean, when you break that down over, what is it, 19, 20, 21, 20 to 4 years overall, it's still showing a general trend of going up.
Yeah, but that's a dangerous thing to do, an average return. You know what I mean? If you just took it,
Yeah.
the 144, divided it by 4, essentially, 4 years worth of data, then, what is that? 25%,
Yeah.
more than 30%, maybe. But we have a negative year this year. So that just shows
Yeah.
the other years were really, really strong, right?
Exactly.
And this negative year, albeit slightly, I think it's an interesting just state of the hobby. It's not so bad in vintage. It's kind of the answer, right? As bad
Yeah.
as it is everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing that in real life too, right?
Yeah.
Prices are a little bit lower, and certainly it varies from card to card, right? It's not every card's not down. Some cards are up, but
Yeah.
it is a trend that I would say vintage is holding steady. Is
Mm-hmm.
kind of the answer I would give if people
Yeah,
ask.
and you'll be able to see it here in the next chart where again you go back 12, 13 months, toward the end of 2021 after all that craziness. I mean, it's stayed within a fairly narrow band.
Right.
And again, this is just a sampling of 100 cards. We've talked about this before. But with these groups of cards, and even within those groups of cards, you have some heavy hitters that have had some swings. I'm thinking the Maze rookie, the Mantle rookie, some of the big name cards that make up this index. Um, Even with fluctuations, and when those cards fluctuate, they don't fluctuate by 50 or $100. They fluctuate by a couple $1,000s sometimes, and
Yeah.
that could really impact the index. But even with that, it's remained fairly stable for essentially the last year.
Yeah. I mean, I think for people that are just joining this journey and like going, what is this? How did they come up with this? Uh, John, you should put a link down to the very first video we did over on Bench
Yeah.
Clear
Yep.
that you and I go through extensively what this is. That way we don't need to bore you with all the details. Just go watch the video.
Yep.
And kind of catch up with how we're tracking this and how we came up with it.
And I'll also put a link because a lot of people have asked that, again, have join in, part of the way through these set of videos. Well, what cards make up the 100 index? So in my initial pre-index set of videos, I go through and I show which of the 100 cards I include in the index and stuff. So yeah, I'll have all those links in the description of this video here, so you can go check them out.
Yeah, that'll be good to catch you guys up if you need it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, the index steady.
Yep.
Not surprising.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I think, and I'm gonna put this on you if this is a complete failure.
Okay.
Is that you had mentioned a few months ago? Obviously, you weren't on last month. You had mentioned something about, it'll be interesting to have some trend line.
Right.
So what I did, if you look at the next slide here, now I didn't do the calculations. I told Excel there was an option, add trend line. So I'm like, sure, let's add a trend line, and
Yep.
boom, it came up with it.
You did it
So I
correctly.
don't know how it's calculated, but
So
here's
creates
go
what's
ahead.
called a linear regression, which
Yeah.
is in layman's terms a trend line.
Yeah.
And it takes all the data points and basically averages them over. It's very complicated math, actually. I wouldn't want to have to manually create a trend line, but look how we're under trend, right? We should be trending upward here.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is maybe next month you
Mhm.
run the trend line and take out those 2 really super high months.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And what you'll see is a change in the slope of the line.
Mhm.
Um,
It'll
not only
it'll be less steep.
correct,
Yeah.
a declination of the slope, right? So
Yeah.
I'm speaking like I'm some math wizard.
Well, here's when I first saw that trend line, I was like, okay, so if you extrapolate I guess in theory, if we had extended the data more going back in time into 2018, 17,
Ah,
16,
okay.
that again, based on this set of data and the trend line, would be that you would see the index right at January of 2019 is around 500. If that trend line holds true, then going back, you would think it would be less than 500 to some extent.
For
Then,
sure.
as you continue in the future, they're saying with an average and all the calculation that go into these trend lines that we should be approaching 1500, but we're not.
Right.
And so I take this as the period just from the data that we have here, starting in January of 2019 through basically the beginning of 2021. You could see that even though a lot of those years were under the trend line, it was still pushing that trend line up. Then we had an exuberance above the line was like, wait a minute, this is way above the long-term trend of where these card prices have been going, and now we're underperforming, and because we're below that line again. So I don't want to. I hate to get this and use nomenclature of investing and stock markets and the term the market. I did a video where I said I wasn't going to call it the baseball card market, but if you were to relate this to stocks, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the time period that was above the line, mainly 2021, was a bull market. And below the trend line would be a bear market where you're retreating a little bit underneath that trend line. Would that be
Um,
close to
close. I would
maybe?
say more accurately that, yeah, I mean, to have a trend line, you have to have data points that are going to be above and below, and it's basically a running average of all of those
No.
points, data points,
Yeah.
right? Um, the big takeaway from a trend line is it upward, up and to the right, or
Mm.
down and to the right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I think what the takeaway from this trend line is, hey, and the steepness of that line, right? The slope of that line
Hmm.
would determine the velocity of that trend.
Yeah.
So the flatter it is, the less volatile that trend, or less,
Hmm.
uh, it's not moving a lot, but it's moving in the right direction, meaning up and
Yeah.
to the right.
Yeah.
This is obviously, if you took away all the data from 2021 backward, it'd still be an upward and
Yeah.
right trend line. It would just be a flatter trend line, which would mean it's just a slower movement.
Yeah.
And as
And
the big prices
yeah.
come in, that trend line, will start accelerating its slope,
Yeah.
getting steeper.
And I think if you were to ask vintage collectors prior to 2021, that you would get most of them saying, yeah, vintage, yeah, it goes up, but it doesn't go up crazy. It's, you can,
Mm-hmm.
it just, cards wouldn't suddenly start spiking, and it would just be, you could get cards for pretty much the same price year over year and maybe little fluctuations or something. Obviously we talk about vintage being condition sensitive. So one may sell higher than another because it has better eye appeal. But um, generally speaking, your vintage cards just held value and slowly went up, if anything.
Yep.
But
Totally
that's been
true for
blown away
decades.
in 2021. Yeah.
Yeah, but all that did was just accelerate the trend line. So
Yep.
the fact that that the index is below the trend line right now is not surprising. It's going to eventually, what it'll do is just lower the slope of that trend line over time back to normal, so to
Yep.
speak,
Yep.
back to long-term trend. Again, if we went back further,
Hmm.
I think we'd be still above the trend line if you had more data points to create a more uh, just a longer timeline or longer trend line. We would,
Hmm.
I think, it would probably be down in the 1,000 range today.
Yeah.
So it's all, and if you only started the trend line at 2021,
Yeah.
we'd be well below the trend line would be, up at 1,800, right? So
Yeah.
It's all based on when you start the data.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we wanted to get some pre-pandemic data, i.e., 2019, as a kind of just normal vintage year, right? Yeah. And we again, should we go back? Yes. If somebody wants to do the data input, please help us. But it's a ton of data, and we have the data is there.
Yeah.
VCP goes back a long way. So sorry, I don't want to get too caught up in the math. The trend line.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is new, and again, I always try to find some new aspect to look at the data, and whatever that may show or whatever it may not. And I have another experiment coming up, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, let's just let's go into those different decades here. So we got the 40s. Now, what I added here is again just what the index has done for the last month. So you can see hardly any change there from October to November. Year to date, 13%. So the 19 cards from the 1940s have done that slow. I think that slow progressive trend line up.
It's been a good year for 40s cards.
Okay. Yes. 50s. The 1950s, on the other hand. And again, those are heavily impacted by some of the big name cards. The 1950s, as you can see, has been very volatile.
Yes.
You have the Mays, the Mantle, the Eddie Matthews,
Clemente.
So the Koufax, you have lots of big name players in the 50s. And again, those cards don't just go up and down by $50.
Right.
When they go up or down, they're significant. So they pull the index one way or another, especially for that decade. So when you go to the 60s, steady as she goes. I mean, that is just like, yeah, you get little ups and downs, but 60s have just held steady overall.
My kind of chart right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me too, because of course I got into building my vintage collection, of course, when in mid 2020, early 2021, the worst time to get into it. And yeah, I would love to see trends like that. So, and then the 70s have been taking a little bit of a beating, but that's on a percentage basis. You have to remember, if you look at the index is like 130. Okay. So, and that's the index is again an average of the sales price for the cards from the 70s. So when you get to the 70s, you're not talking, generally speaking, high dollar cards. So a 15% decline in a $60 or $70 card is not much.
Right.
So percentage looks bad.
Right.
But from an actual dollar value, you're not losing a whole lot from the 70s cards. And this is just a compilation to see how all those charts there factor in. The main one is that blue line in the middle. That's the index. And as you can see, it is heavily influenced by the cards from the 1950s. As that goes, it pulls up or pushes down the overall index.
Yep.
Now, this is the area where I tried to do something, and we both, again, it's just looking at data, and maybe this is the only time we look at it. For the last couple months, I had reported on how many cards for that particular month in the index went up, how many went down, and how many were unchanged. So I thought, hey, let's start a new trend line here. And so I looked up the data for the last, I guess this is 11 months now, and charted it and included. So that yellow line is the index. So on the right-hand side of that chart is the vintage index level. And on the left, where it goes 20, 40, and 60, those are the number of cards up or down or unchanged. So starting
they can be different cards, right? I mean, a card might be up one month and down the next. It can be different cards.
It could be different cards. It's in any particular month, how many, not which particular, but how many cards went up versus down versus unchanged. Again, thinking that, are there any trends in the number of cards. Again, if you have a bunch of cards over time, more of them go up than down, you can maybe infer that, okay, this may not be one particular card or two particular cards in the index. Maybe there's a general trend. So, as you can see, starting off the year, there was a pretty big gap between more cards going up than cards going down. Then you get into April and it flips.
Right.
So now you have more cards going down than up. And then we have a flipping again in August to where more cards are going up versus down. Now, again, if you look at the index, that doesn't necessarily correspond. You see a little bit of a drop in the index from, say, April through July, August, or say July when it flips. Okay. But, one card could go up by $1,000 and 10 cards could go down by $5 and the index will still go up. So, again, it doesn't go into how much it has gone up versus how much has gone down. It's just which number of cards. So again, this may not tell us anything. This may be, hey, John, thanks for doing all this work, but it doesn't
Uh,
show us anything. But there could be something in here that, I don't know, we can make some
I'll make
inferences
an
on.
inference from this. If you look at January, which is really December's data, that's
Yep.
something to point out to
Yep.
everybody. There were only 19 unchanged cards. An unchanged card occurs when there's just simply no sales.
Yeah.
It's rare that an unchanged card is because the next sale was the exact same as the last one.
Right.
And so that's very unusual. What we see is just cards not trading. The number of cards from 19 to 30, now you go from teens for the first low 20s to mid 20s into the 30s, upper 20s. That trend of unchanged cards says a lot to me about what the velocity of the market. And what I mean by that is I don't think there's as many people aren't as enthusiastic. You see ups and downs because people are moving cards, right? When you see unchanged, things aren't moving as much,
Yep.
right? Either it's unchanged because there's not many of them, and we did a whole thing on pop reports. Remember,
Yep.
if you have a low pop card, that makes sense that it would be unchanged. There's just not a lot of them out there, or you have cards that there are copies out there. I think the unchanged might speak to, especially the last 3 or 4 months, higher unchanged is people are keeping their cards. They're not lowering their prices to
Yep.
try to sell them. And therefore they go unchanged. Most of these cards, honestly, few of them go via auction on eBay. If you have a higher end card, like most of these 50s and 40s cards and stuff, you're going to put it out there for a crazy bite now and hope somebody hits your price.
Yeah.
Right.
I was, as you started that analysis, I thought to myself, you know what, that could indicate just because a card in this index is unchanged, that means that a card, that particular card did not have a sale recorded for that month. There could be 10 cards listed, as you say, for buy it now, but no one's biting. So we don't know the population that, I didn't go and do a current search of current listings. And of course, the vintage cards prices goes beyond eBay. They do auction houses and stuff, but those auction houses are auctions. So pretty much unless there's a reserve that isn't met, they pretty much sell. But we're talking eBay data here. And yeah, there could be copies out there for sale right now that you could buy, but they're priced so high, people are saying, no, I'm not interested in that price, and it doesn't sell.
And it leads to a higher number of unchanged cards, right?
Yes. Yep.
Again, we'd love to hear your feedback on our theories. We might be crazy.
Yeah. It wouldn't be the first time I'm called crazy. So
you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So the next area that I wanted to test a theory. And so in looking at different cards in the index, And again, thinking of those cards that have not had a sale for quite some time. Again, could be population, so none of them have come up for sale, or they've been priced too high that no one wants to buy them at that price. So those two variables there. But when I went into this, blind. I didn't do this, after I looked up the cards. Is my theory was if a card, especially in low population, hasn't had a recorded sale, assuming it's because not many have been available for sale, not that they've
Right.
been priced too high, okay, that once a card does become available, then there is a more intense interest in that card. Oh my gosh, I've been waiting for 6 months for a copy of this card to show up, or I've been waiting, for however long for this grade, hopefully in my price range, so I'm going to go after it. So my theory was that if there's a long period of time that a card does not have a recorded sale, when there is one, the price would be higher than it was the previous recorded sale. That was my theory.
Got it.
Okay. So going into it, here's one example of the 48 Bob Feller in a PSA 4, which is the grade that we're assigning by decade and so on. Now, there was a sale right in the beginning of 2022. There's that slight little bump up. Now, this one disproved my theory,
Right.
because when there was a sale, it was lower than the previous one. Now, again, a lot of variables here. You can't talk in absolutes when it comes to vintage, because it could have been an off-center 4 and the previous one was dead on, but maybe a little bit of corner wear, which gave it a 4. So there are other variables there. Not all PSA 4s are alike, as we know. So, but just looking at the raw data, that one did not prove or go along with my theory. But let's take a look at the next one. Now, Bob Lemon. All right. Now, Bob Lemon didn't have a sale for, it looks like, almost close to a year between 2019 and 2020. When did Bob Lemon get into Hall of Fame? Was he one of the newer ones?
No, long time ago.
Long time ago. Okay. So there's a long period there in 2019, early 2020. Then when one came available and then another and another. Now, again, you have to discount some of this, but this is actually 2020. This is before the huge bubble of 2021.
Right.
But here you see it. And then there's another time period. So this card had 2 time periods. So now you're looking into end of 2021 into 2022, and another one sells, and it sells for slightly higher. So, okay, well, Bob Feller, maybe not. Bob Lemon maybe holds true. So let's take a look at another one.
Okay.
Pee Wee Reese. Here's one where this is, I can't count all the dots, probably 14, 15 months, it looks like.
Right.
No sales. Then suddenly, boom, one came up. And so, again, I don't know all the details. I didn't do a whole lot of research of what this one was, what that one was. But that's a significant jump. And there are a couple
More
other
than
cards
doubled.
here.
The card more than doubled
Yeah.
in
And
between sales, right?
so if you have if you're at a card show, or a listing comes up on eBay, and you go, oh, well, what are the comps? Well, you look and, geez, well, the last one sold in May of 2021. Well, heck, that's like a year and a half ago. Yeah, it sold for that. Well, what's the current price for that? I mean, it's almost like, okay, well, hey, that $325 seems reasonable. Okay, I mean, and that may be, hey, I haven't seen a PSA 4 Pee Wee Reese in such a long time. I'm going after it. And someone else says the same thing. I don't know if this was a buy it now or an auction, but that was quite dramatic of a bump up. All right, the next one, Duke Snyder. Again, there was a little trend starting in 2019 where there wasn't one sold, then sold for a little bit less. Then, again, not many Duke Snyders in a PSA 4 have recorded sales. So it first dipped, then again, not quite like the Pee Wee Reese, but had a pretty big spike when there was one for sale.
Yeah,
Um,
800 to 1600. That's
yeah,
doubling. That's pretty significant.
yeah, and again, it could be eye appeal as well. There could be a lot of factors. So if more of these cards turn out to maybe follow my hypothesis, I'm not going to say I was right, but maybe righter than wrong. But let's go to the next one here. Early win. Um, this one had about two jumps. Again, you had that 2019 into 2021, then a spike, then a few sales up and down, and then another long period, and then another little spike up. And here's another one, sort of like the Pee Wee Reese, where, but again, a tale of two cards here. You have a long period, and then when one came available, it sold for less. Could have been eye appeal, but then another long trend, and then a big spike.
Yeah, but if I remember, this is one of the lowest pops
Yeah,
in this grade of the entire index.
yeah. But if that's the case, then how do you explain after that first lull of sales that, hey, oh my gosh, a Don Newcomb PSA 4 or PSA 5, because of 1950, a PSA 5's for sale, and it sells for less right at the start of the bubble, and then you don't see another one, and then the big spike. So
Yeah, I mean,
it's, I don't know.
not a ton of them out there, I think. And when one
Yeah.
comes up now, I think your theory's probably more accurate on this card than any other.
Yeah. And okay, I think we have a couple others here. So the 51 Monty Irvin. Now, he was a recent Hall of Famer.
Nope, forever.
Forever. Okay, who am I thinking of?
Minoso.
Yeah, maybe I'm thinking Minoso. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So there was a long period there in 2021 where, again, either because of low pop or huge asking prices or whatever, but there wasn't a sale for Monty Irvin for probably close to a year. Then you get a big spike, but then there have been a couple of recent sales that are like, yeah, I'm not paying all the way up there for that card, and it's come back down.
Right.
Um, Again, condition, I keep saying it, condition could play a huge part. I know in my eBay searches, if I'm looking for a particular card, I don't care what the asking price is. If it doesn't meet my eye appeal, I just move on, and I'm not willing to pay, especially a high price for a card that to me isn't visually appealing. But that's me, and maybe other collectors are like that. And this is the last one here. This was I threw it in. It didn't really have a whole lot this one actually had more data points. So a card that I think is in a higher population in a PSA 5. So you got a lot of historical sales data, but then there are a couple periods where the sales sort of dried up a little bit. And then you saw a little bit of a spike, and then a lowering, and then a final spike this last month. So this one, yeah, maybe in that middle road.
Yeah.
So that was,
But this one, it's also 150 to 190. It went up $40. But
yeah,
so again, just keep there's just different things to keep in mind. It's just fun looking at data. That's all I
yeah,
think.
I know. That's yeah. So, um, we have another month here of, generally speaking, within the whole index, not too much movement.
Right.
I was actually, to be honest with you, now I know you can't infer too much of this. These are 100 cards, but the index for the last, I think, 2 or 3 months had been going down a little bit. And I thought for sure once I actually did the data that I'd see just a little bit more of a dip, and it came up a little bit. I was a little surprised, but again, there could be a lot of factors within these 100 cards.
Sure. Imagine if we had 1,000 cards, or I mean,
Yeah.
obviously more data points is better for determining. Like on the Dow 30 is a terrible measure of what the stock market is doing. It's 30 stocks out of thousands and thousands. So
Hmm.
the S&P 500 is even a pretty crappy uh,
Yeah.
deal because it only deals with one sector of the market, the large cap area. So
Yeah.
it's you can't look at this and infer sports cards themselves are terrible or good or bad, right?
Yeah. Now's the time to buy. Now's the time to sell. I mean, there's so many factors. And again, we're even just talking about vintage cards. I mean, there are whole other
Sure.
YouTubers out there that are focusing on these modern sales. And I'm watching some of them and like, oh yeah, this card sold for $60,000 6 months ago or whatever, and now the latest sales that, I mean, there's so many segments within the hobby that it's just
And we're only looking at one grade within the spectrum of grades and one
yeah.
company, and only looking at PSA. So
Oh
look,
yeah.
we understand the limitations of what we're doing here. It's something. It's better than
It is
zero.
exactly, and it's not meant to be any type of. We're not being any advisors here or influencers or whatever. We're just two guys that just love to look at data. We're data geeks. We love
Nerds.
vintage
Nerds.
baseball cards, and we're just combining the two and say, hey, can we have fun just looking at some of these numbers? Is there anything that we can see from them and just have a good time about it, not be too serious? Because it's if you buy a card that you like the price for, you're buying it. If you don't like the price, you're not buying it. Same with me. It just comes down to that individual level and that individual card that we may be interested in. So
Well, good stuff, man.
thanks. And
Appreciating the
of course,
advice.
we always encourage comments. If you have some thoughts on what type of data you want us to look at, as we're approaching, we got technically one more month of data. The December, we'll throw in November's data, and actually January will have December. So we're a couple months away from doing
Having a
a
full
sort
number.
of a year-end look at the index for 2022. So that'll be coming up in the next couple months. But yeah, we encourage you to let us know what your thoughts are. If there's any data, if you're willing to sit at home and enter data into a spreadsheet for the going back 10 years, let us know. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
We'd
Mike,
love to have more
always
data.
appreciate your insight. Looking forward to another episode next month, which will probably be in maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe we can get this one out before the holidays instead of after, but we'll see. I'm sure both of us are going to be busy toward the end of the year.
Yeah, we'll get
Um,
it done. We'll get it
yeah.
done.
All right. So, with that, hey, that's all we have for you. So, until next time, thanks for watching.